On July the 17th, 2018, Blizzard Entertainment released World of Warcraft patch 8.0. It had bugs. A lot of bugs. In this video, we'll be discussing what happened, why it happened, and where to go from here. Hello, and welcome to Archvalder's Hacks with Archvalder and his amazing hacks. Patch 8.0, the pre-expansion pack for the forthcoming Battle for Azeroth, was released just over a week ago and caused a lot of controversy in the WoW community. This was objectively the worst patch launch in World of Warcraft's history. More than a week after launch, the game is fundamentally broken in literally all areas, from leveling through PvP, through PvE, to pet battles. The Blizzard damage limitation machine went into overdrive, with game director Ian Hozakostas delivering a candid interview about the fiasco. Several YouTubers covered the issue, the consensus being that Blizzard had messed up, but as Hozakostas had said, they were fixing the bugs, the implication being that people should be patient and accept the situation. Now, this picture of events is not entirely accurate. Something about the way the issue was treated, as if it were an inevitability of a patch launch, made me feel uneasy. Before I start, I want to make it clear how I do this type of video. I think there's enough people sharing opinions on the internet already. What I try to do in videos like this is offer a specific perspective based on my expertise and try to avoid tainting that perspective with my own personal bias. This is an issue where I live, breathe and sleep flaws in game design. I monitor official and unofficial forums almost constantly. Generally speaking, most of the game flaws I discover are what hackers call zero-day exploits. Ghost code that the developers themselves are not actually aware of. This video is not about criticism of individuals. In particular, I am not criticizing Hozakostas, who mostly does a very good job of speaking plainly and imparting information with a minimum of corporate jargon and deflection. And for that matter, I'm not criticizing other Blizzard employees. Nor am I criticizing YouTubers who mostly do a good job of remaining impartial, despite the extraordinary pressures many of them are under, which is something I'll cover in this video. However, there are genuine problems here to do with corporate culture. Now, why did the patch break so many aspects of the game? Essentially, Blizzard chose to fix the scaling problem they have, with the numbers at endgame being increasingly large, by squishing the numbers across the game. With every expansion, Blizzard gave the players greater power in the form of numerically increasing player attributes, and this has led to impractical numbers in the millions at endgame. To compensate, Blizzard scaled back the numbers across the game, and in fact they've done this before. What was different this time is that they appear to have used an algorithm, some kind of crude formula, to effectively automate the process. What appears to be occurring here is part of a trend that seems to be spreading across the whole tech world and beyond, where algorithmic or AI-based solutions are used to solve problems which previously could only have been solved by an impractical amount of labour. The best example of this is the changes to YouTube, where an automated solution was applied to the problem of offensive content appearing in videos. But there are many other examples, stretching from the world of sports betting, where shrewd gamblers defeated overly crude statistical approximations designed to swiftly create betting odds, to the financial markets, where the assumption that the markets were normally distributed led to the financial crisis of 2008. The problem with such solutions is that, while they may work in a majority of cases, it inevitably causes problems in a minority of scenarios, as a crude statistical formula can't cope with all the possibilities in something complex like World of Warcraft. On the face of it, this seems almost unavoidable, and comes across as a plausible defence from Blizzard, and to some extent it is. But it also suggests a serious lack of initiative and imagination on the part of the company in certain areas. It isn't the case that statistical-based approaches or the use of algorithms to solve this type of problem is necessarily a bad idea in itself, but it is not an adequate solution by itself. In order to make this type of approach work, you need to fortify it with both human input and an additional set of pairing algorithms designed to locate and eliminate any resulting flaws in the code. Now, that did not happen. What happened was that Blizzard seemed to expect its own player community to tell them how their game wasn't working. Blizzard were essentially very passive. The community can be effective in some instances with reporting this type of information, but often it's too blunt an instrument. What was needed was a more dynamic and proactive approach. The flaws in the code were problems I'd seen repeatedly over multiple content launches, some stretching back as far as Cataclysm, and you'd think that Blizzard would have detailed game files on previous coding errors and their fixes with which to prioritize. And this obviously didn't happen because many of those flaws are still active as I'm making this video. You would think a billion-dollar company would have someone in place to spearhead such an operation, someone with a comprehensive knowledge of the subject, not just that of prior issues, but also how related areas of the game could cause correlated problems. Someone who could target the algorithm in places where it had broken down at the extremities, and where a crude statistical solution was least efficient. Maybe even someone who could recognize coding flaws that accidentally result in interesting gameplay and can create spontaneous new content worth developing. And unfortunately, clearly there is just no one who can do that. And given that I know of multiple teenagers, literally teenagers, on Encore who can do all that stuff without blinking, you really wonder why that is. Ultimately, you wonder what the role of Activision, who owned Blizzard, in this launch was. Because there does seem to be a preference at the top of these organisations for bogus, magical, costless solutions that you suspect appeal to clueless and out-of-touch corporate managers. Now, having made it clear that I find Ian Hazzikostas essentially a force for good within the company, I did find some of the ameliorated language he used intentionally or possibly unintentionally misleading, despite the fact he was commendably candid in general about Blizzard screwing up. In particular, the description of in-game issues as being quality of life issues is a big understatement. If you cannot progress in a game because there is an impassable roadblock in the content in the form of broken code, then you can't play the game you paid for. That's not a quality of life issue, that's a broken game. Hazzikostas also said, the more actionable feedback we get, the more quickly we can track down and fix every one of these issues. Now that's being somewhat economical with the truth, because according to many beta testers who attempted to report bugs that they found, they went unheeded. Beta testing has become a byword on YouTube for a form of game promotion rather than its original purpose. Blizzard obviously benefits from the continuous promotion of their game here and on Twitch. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that in itself, but if you don't treat your testing process seriously, then it is disingenuous to marginalise the problems that eventually occur. Moreover, and I suspect this is not common knowledge, bugs reported on the official forums often go unheeded, quite literally for months or in some cases even years. The vast majority of bug reports in fact go unheeded. Some are indeed too trivial to prioritise, armour items clipping through certain classes for example, but many are significant impediments to game progression for multiple players. Blue posts in response to bug reports are extremely rare, probably less than one post in 1,000. There's a degree of what can only be described as disdain for players who are essentially acting as unpaid interns on the part of Blizzard staff who themselves seem demotivated and only willing to put in the minimum amount of effort to fix any problems. The culture just seems to be wrong. Anonymous reports of Blizzard staff suggest overworked individuals in a high turnover climate of cronyism and nepotism, and it isn't difficult to see why those people employed in a capacity to fix bugs would lack motivation. For me, finding some flaw in game code is always generally exciting. It opens up a fantastic array of new possibilities, new abilities, new visual effects, enhanced player power, or new and challenging game content that I get to share with my viewers. For those employees, it is just a task, something to be eliminated from the code. There's no creativity, imagination, or incentivization involved. Ports themselves basically have to be constructed from start to finish, recommending a clear and unambiguous set of steps in order for Blizzard to actually act on them. If, for example, a player encounters an effect in a location outside of the zone that it was intended for, no one at Blizzard seems willing or even capable of reverse engineering the process in game, even when I myself have found it trivial to do so. Contrast this with the much more serious focus that occurs when it emerges a given bug can be used advantageously by players. It is not uncommon for bugs that have persisted for years, posted multiple times on the official forums, to be almost instantly fixed when I post them here on this channel. This has happened so many times that people who repeatedly encountered a frustrating bug would simply go directly to me to make a video about it, knowing that this would be faster than using the official Blizzard channels. It is a very weird way of doing things. You'd think Blizzard would welcome that type of video, as very often I save them a lot of time and effort by filling in the blanks using my obsessive knowledge of the subject, but they very actively discourage publicisation of this type of bug, despite the fact that publication seems to be the only trigger that causes them to fix the problem. The message that Blizzard is sending is a very strange one. Game bugs that negatively impact the player's enjoyment are of zero importance, whereas bugs that can be used to advantage the player have to be fixed with the highest priority. This sometimes occurs with effects that are themselves utterly harmless, involving purely cosmetic effects, and offer no conceivable threat to game stability. For example, have a look at my top 10 toys video on this channel. Many of the cosmetic effects in that video were fixed almost instantly after I uploaded it, despite being in the game for years, and you just wonder how that can be a priority when tens of thousands of people at any one time may be stuck on a bugged quest that prevents further progress on the quest chain. This in itself continually wastes thousands of hours of Games Master time who have to deal with each of these problems individually. The cost of this must be staggering. Now, I just wanted to cover the issue of how YouTubers handled the release of this patch and other similar issues. It is worth bearing in mind that most Warcraft YouTubers are largely dependent on AdSense revenue for their income, revenue which has been in serious decline recently. The way AdSense works is that if you are one of the small number of viewers who do not have adblock and you see an ad for a product and then click on it, then the YouTuber receives some small amount of money, usually a few cents. The ad you are most likely to see on a YouTube channel about Warcraft is obviously Warcraft itself. So if the YouTuber is being critical of Warcraft in some way, then they are less likely to make money. Additionally, for psychological reasons, positive YouTube videos do better than negative ones. Finally, channels like this one, which really annoy Blizzard, can be subject to other measures, such as, in my particular case, being targeted with copyright strikes. All these factors combine to make it very difficult for YouTubers to offer an independent perspective. This is not a criticism of any individual YouTuber. It is an explanation of how a broken video sharing system can enable a broken video game to sometimes get away with murder. In fact, I am impressed by the integrity of the vast majority of YouTubers who do often sneak in legitimate criticisms of the game when they believe it is justified. So, there's the video. Hope you liked it. If you did, why not subscribe? And if you're curious to see where this particular bunny hole goes, you may be curious enough to look at my Patreon, which I'll link to below. Thanks for watching. This has been Archvalda.